interesting. You know, I was trying to call with my virtual camera to somebody's smartphone or messenger, and it just kept going, something went wrong, something went wrong. Well, what you talking about? Something went wrong, something. I hate when people just talk about the things of things behind it. Man, what the hell is your thing doing with the thing when it can't even get the thing in the thing when you're trying to do the thing? Hate that. Oh. Anyway, back again. Flipping. Let's see where we're gonna go. Ooh. Finna lock down. Likes to get covered. It's so robot. Look, he already got hit with this. Yes. Oh, that was fun. Zap somebody. No. Will I ever learn how to play this game? That's what you is, man. You don't need to tell nobody. And doing that stuff too. Just like that. That's right. I did not like that result. Try something different. How come they still beat me?
list of other benefits conferred. But in the greatest thing we have done for them, we have builded wiser than we knew. God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform. In 14 years we have welded the Filipinos into one homogeneous political unit. In a most charming book, entitled An Englishwoman in the Philippines, 448, we can see our attempts to fit government by two political parties into overseas colonization caricatured without sting until we really remind ourselves of a hippopotamus caressing a squirrel. In one passage the British sister describes our program as one to educate the Filipino for all he's worth, so that he may, in the course of time, be fit to govern himself according to American methods. But at the same time they have plenty of soldiers to knock him on the head if he shows signs of wanting his liberty before the Americans think he is fit for it. A quaint scheme, she naively adds, and one full of the go-ahead originality of America. The more we teach the Filipinos, the more intimately they will become acquainted, in their own way, with the history of the relations between our country and theirs from the beginning, including the taxation without representation, through congressional legislation, hereinafter noticed, placed or kept on our statute books by the hand, trust and other special interests in the United States, and they will learn all these things in the midst of a growing gulf between the two peoples. 449. In 14 years we have made these unwilling subjects, whom we neither want nor need any more than they want or need us, a unit. A unit for home rule in preference to alien domination, it is true. But, nevertheless, a patriotic unit, one people, a potential body politic, which can take a modest, but self-respecting place in the concert of free nations, with only a little more additional help from us. Between social reforms and revolution there shifts for the social democracy in India and constabulary during the first 4 or 5 years after the Taft government of the Philippines was founded, the function of a representative of the Office of the Attorney General, coming from Manila to help the local prosecuting attorney handle a large docket and a crowded jail, was by no means remotely analogous to that of a grand jury. He originated prosecutions, found no bill, etc. When M.R. Harvey came to Samar, he came direct to the courtroom, and I suspended the trial of the pending case. And, after greeting him, began an informal talk which was akin to the nature of a charge to a grand jury, putting him in possession of the general aspects of the uprising. He was a very just and kindly man, and entered into the spirit of the task. I elaborated on a class of cases where the defendant claimed, as most of them did, yes, I joined the band of brigands, but I was made to do so. It was also indictable to furnish supplies to the public enemy. This presented the class of cases where the brigands would swoop down on a town and demand rice, and not getting it, would sometimes kill the persons refusing it, and so intimidate the rest into finding rice for them. Also there was the class of cases where a man would claim to have been one of the inhabitants of an unprotected town who had gone off to the hills in a body, for safety, to propitiate the mountain people by becoming part of them. This sort of thing at one time threatened to become epidemic with all the coast towns. It did not, however, a modus vivendi of some sort, sometimes express, sometimes merely tacit, would be arranged between the coast people and the hill people. These modus vivendi arrangements enabled the coast people to obtain a certain degree of safety, in lieu of that we should have secured them but did not, by making the hill folk believe that the coastmen were against us and for them. At one time the prosecuting attorney got hold of evidence sufficient to authorize the issuance of a warrant for the president of Balonica, the man supposed to have engineered the massacre of the 9th Infantry. In September 1901, I authorized the issuance of the warrant for his arrest. But the native governor of the province, and also Major Dade, the American regular officer commanding the constabulary, satisfied me that we did not have force sufficient to protect Balonica from the Pelagians if we arrested the president, who, being persona gratitu, the Pelagians, was able to keep them from descending on his town. To arrest him would therefore mean, in their opinion, that the people of Balonica would take to the hills for protection, and join the hill folk, or Pelagians, and if the town as large as Balonica said any such example all the coast towns might follow it, so the supposed perpetrator of the 9th Infantry Massacre was allowed to remain unmolested, the American court was impotent to enforce its processes. In my mass of Philippine papers there is one containing a copy of my remarks to the Assistant Attorney General on his arrival at Catbalogan, above referred to as analogous to a charge to a grand jury at home. It is dated Catbalogan, Samar, September 28, 1904, and is headed, Remarks by the Court upon the occasion of the arrival of Assistant Attorney General Harvey, with regard to the recent disturbances in Samar, and the cases for brigandage and sedition growing out of the same. Certain parts of this contemporary document will doubtless give the reader a more vivid apprehension of the then situation than he can get from mere subsequent description. Of course, the visiting representative of the Attorney General's office was familiar in a general way with the manner of the handling of the Albay insurrection in the previous year, described in the chapter preceding this. In discussing the Samar situation, the remarks of the court contain, among other things, this passage. In the cases growing out of the Albay disturbances, there were a great many people who strayed out to the mountains just like cattle. They did not know why or whither they went. As to those persons, Judge Carson, M.R. Ross, and myself were unanimous in the opinion that some of them could be indicted under the vagrancy law. There were others of a greater degree of guilt, but who did not appear to have been what you might call ordinary thieves, and we were all agreed to indict those under the sedition law, the limit of which is 10 years and $10,000. Thus you do not force upon a judge at first instance the responsibility of sentencing a man to 20 years of his life for a connection with bandits, which may be but little more than technical. Besides those two classes, there were in Albay of course the bandit classes, to whom the Vandalismo brigandage law was specially intended to apply. There cannot be any doubt about the fact that this Vandalismo law is one of the most stringent statutes that ever was on the statute books of any country. It is very far from the purpose of this court to attempt to say what would be the wisest legislation, or to say that this is not the very best legislation under the circumstances. How we administer the several laws related to governing public order will settle whether or not substantial justice is done. The men in the United States who in those days were slinging mud at the Philippine trial judges of things Serbia, totally missed the core of the whole matter. In the provinces where so many heavy sentences were imposed, the real situation was that a state of war existed, and the judges believed, and I think correctly, that they were practically a military commission of one, and much more able to give a prisoner ordeal, tempering justice with mercy, than officers, briefly gathered from the scenes of the fighting to act as a military commission. We try those men with as little prejudice as if they had just come from the moon. Moreover, from the italicized concluding words of the above excerpt from my talk to the Assistant Attorney General, it will be seen that the court had practically unlimited discretion in the matter of punishment, and was, in fact, about the only court of criminal equity in the annals of Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence. In the last analysis, the righteousness or unrighteousness of a civil government in a country not yet entirely subjugated depends on whether more innocent people suffer through completing the work of subjugation with constabulary whose prisoners of war are tried to see what they may have done, if anything, by one-man courts, or whether more innocent people suffer through completing the work of subjugation as any other great power on earth would have completed it, with an army trying to prisoners by military commission, unless you himself or a traitor to your country, you consider as criminal attempts to subvert your government by cutthroats that no one of the respectable Filipinos, from Aguinaldo and Juan Flores down, would have hesitated to have shot summarily, which you to make the punishment in each case of the crime ascertained, as dispassionately as if the defendant were fresh from the moon, just what each accused might have himself done either Aguinaldo, or an American military commission would have had such people shot in bunches, as not entitled to be treated as prisoners of war. The trouble with the civil government did not lie in its judiciary, but in its constabulary. It was the physical handling of the crimes of prisoners are the constabulary and their failure, because not numerous enough to protect peacefully inclined people, which made it a fact that turning the situation over to the military would have meant less sacrifice of the innocent along with the guilty. It is much more merciful to kill a few hundred people as a lesson to the rest, and let the rest go, with a clear understanding that if they insurrect again you will promptly kill a few hundred more than to commit a minute term, from one month to another and from 1 year to another, with all the untilled fields, famine, pestilence, and other diseases involved, merely in order to be able to invoke the blessing of the Dr. Lemon, abbots of the world on a supposedly benign civil government. In all my sentences, and in all his indictments, M.R. Harvey and the writer sailed close to the wind, by holding only those responsible, who had taken active parts in the sacking and burning of villages and the massacre of their inhabitants. I knew that sooner or later some officious prosecuting attorney of less noble mold than Harvey would ask me to convict some poor creature of brigandage for giving a little rise to the brigands, and my mind was made up to refuse to do so, and in so refusing to commit heresy once and for all by expressing my sentiments in the decision concerning the failure to give adequate protection to defenseless people along the lines indicated in this chapter. No such case was in fact presented. I broke down under the strain of graver cases early in November and left Samar forever, bound for Manila. Before I left the whole island for season with expedition, I was told by a credible American that the chief deputy sheriff of the port, an ex-sergeant officer, one of the chiefs at any price, policy appointees, had been marking on the fact that some people waiting could not expect the remarks to be repeated. I see no risk persecuting our brethren in the hills. The municipal officials of the provincial capital, Catalogan, were suspected of the native provincial governor, and the latter in turn was suspected by the Manila government. In fact, the whole political atmosphere of the island had become full of rumor and suspicion as to who was for the government, and who was against the government. I left Manila November 8th, which was the day of the presidential election of 1904, determined to try no more insurrections. By that time nearly everybody in the island was more or less guilty of sedition, and I did not know the method of drawing an indictment against the whole people. Chapter XIX. Governor Wright, 1905. My heart is heavy with the fate of that unhappy people. Speech upon A.O. Bacon in U.S. Senate, 450. Because the especially cordial relations which existed to the last, between Governor Wright and myself 451, are familiar to a number of very dear mutual friends, I deem it due both to them and to myself, in view of the contents of the preceding chapter, to state that I see no reason why, in writing a history of the American occupation of the Philippines, I should omit or slur the facts which convinced me that that occupation ought to terminate as soon as practicable, and that any decent kind of a government of Filipinos by Filipinos would be better for all concerned than the McKinley-Taft program of benevolent assimilation whereof Governor Wright was the legatee. By the 1001 uncandid threads of that program, slowly woven from 1898 to 1904, as indicated in the first 16 chapters of this book, Governor Wright had found himself as hopelessly bound to concealment from the American people of the real situation in Samar in the fall of 1904, as a Gulliver in Lilliput. When I finally left Samar and came to Manila in November 1904, I was not prepared to figure out how soon the blunder we made by the purchase of the Philippine archipelago could be corrected, but my mental attitude toward the whole Philippine problem had undergone a complete change. In 1901, Governor Wright, then Vice Governor, had written me, "You younger men out here, who have cast your fortunes with this country, are to be more likely in the natural course of events, the future rulers, I cannot from to the idealist, the devotion of what was really high and earnest purpose, untroubled with misgivings of any kind." In November 1903, in Albany, Judge Carson and myself had talked over the long struggle of the civil government to walk without leaning on the military, and, with the readiness of one vested with authority to believe such authority wisely vested, and the readiness of a civilian lawyer to jealously guard the American home idea that the military should be subordinate to the civil authority, I had cordially agreed with the sentiment one day expressed by Judge Carson concerning Governor Taft about the splendid moral fiber of the man, making the keeping the military from prancing out of the traces. After Governor Taft left the islands to be Secretary of War, December 23, 1903, and while I was still in Albay, I had learned of the 120 men who had died in the Albay jail while awaiting trial, and, thereafter something of the magnitude of the Ola insurrection there, and that had given me pause as to the practical benevolence of the operation of a benign civil government, then the summer massacres of 1904, and the Korea Canada I after witnessed, it finally convinced me that a republic like ours is wholly unfitted to govern people against their consent, but I did not tell anybody in Manila all these things. I simply pondered them. Grover Cleveland was the only man in the world I would have liked to talk to just then freely and fully, and he was not about. My heart was heavy with the fate of that unhappy people, as Thomas Jefferson had said in the Senate in 1902, after visiting the islands. In 1901, I did not condemn Governor Wright. I quite realized that I was up against about the largest ethical problem of world politics, one on which the nations are much divided, and that I was not infallible. I did not say to the Governor, "Governor, let's resign and go home and tell our people that this whole business is a mistake," nor did I ever lose faith in Governor Wright. Personally, if I had, I might just as well have said, after this, the Dutch, I would simply have lost faith in human nature. I have not then, nor have I since, known a man of higher personal character. I had simply lost faith in benevolent assimilation, and begun to take the Filipino people seriously as a potential nation, probably better, able to handle their own domestic problems than we will ever be able to handle them for them. The day after I resigned, M.R. Justice Carson of the Supreme Court and M.R. Wellesley, the Attorney General, came to call on me. My friends knew I was very much troubled over the family business. I was doing some grumbling, but without specifying, because to specify would mean that we all of us ought to give up the life careers we had planned for ourselves in the islands. I knew the old familiar answer of grumbler was sure to get in the front of things. "This old man, you've been out here too long. You'd better go home," but I didn't. Little more grumbling to my friends Judge Carson and M.R. Wellesley. During the course of their visit, they could both pretty well guess what was the matter. But Judge Carson and I had come out in 1899 and had served through the war together. He knew all about the LA business and somewhat about Panama business. Wellesley had not come out until the civil government was founded in 1901. M.R. Wellesley said cheerily, "Oh, Blount, you are too conscientious. I shall never forget what happened then." Judge Carson said, with a ring of something like anger in his tone, "No, Wellesley, LBD, D if he is it any wonder that ever since I have worn that man, as Hamlet would say, in my heart for?" He was as brave and true an Irishman as ever gained distinction on battlefield or bench, and he understood. He did not say, which was the implication of Wellesley's tone, "Old man, you've been out here too long, and illness has made you peevish." He knew what was the matter. He knew that as trial judges he and I had not been small editions of Lord Jeffreys, as some of our American critics had implied, but he also knew that there was no method of drawing an indictment against a whole people. Possibly the intensity of my feelings on this great subject, then, and ever since, tempers the power of clear expression. Therefore, a word more in attempt at elucidation. In 1898, Judge Carson and I, with many thousands of other young Americans, had trooped down to Cuba, in the wake of the impetuous Roosevelt, to free the inhabitants of that ill-fated island from Spanish rule, drive the Spaniards from the Western Hemisphere, and put a stop to Spain's pious efforts to spare the great island from the dangers of premature independence, as she always expressed her attitude toward Cuba. We had, many of us, been fired by the catchy Roosevelt utterance which did so much to bring on the Spanish War, viz. The steps of the White House are slippery with the blood of the Cuban reconcentrados. Then in 1899, we had gone to the Philippines, and had ever since been engaged there, in sparing the islands from the danger of premature independence. And the Samar massacres of 1904, to me, the apotheosis of the work. So that after November 8, 1904, I felt the steps of the White House are slippery with the blood of the people of my district. It had all been done under the pious pretense that the Filipinos welcomed our rule, a pretense which had taken the form for 6 years of systematic asseveration that they did so welcome it. Yet it was not true that they, or any appreciable fraction of them, had ever welcomed our rule, and it never will be true. Surely no man can see in this book any scolding or unkindness. It is an attempt merely to bring home to my countrymen a strategic fact, a fact which it is folly to ignore. But to return to the thread of our story. 4 days after the presidential election of 1904, to wit, on November 12th, Governor Wright left Manila and went to Samar, including in his itinerary various others of the southern islands. 452. Soon after their return, the 700 native troops in Samar were increased to nearly 2,000, and 16 companies of regulars, say 100 men to a company, were also thrown into Samar. It took until the end of 1906 to end the trouble. You cannot find in the reports of the civil authorities anything explaining their 3 or 4 week stay in the Visayan Islands in November-December 1904. That is not absolutely in accord with the original Taft obsession of 1900 about the popularity of the proposed alien civil government with its subjects. Governor Wright's description of the trip says, "The warm hospitality of the Filipino people made this trip of inspection a most agreeable one. As a matter of fact, on such occasions, the more disaffected a leader of the people was, the more he would seek, by warm hospitality, warm oratory telling the visiting mighty what the visiting mighty longed to hear, parades, fiestas, etc., to divert suspicion of sedition from himself." The poor creatures had met General Young's cavalry column in northern Luzon in 1899, with their town bands, doing the only thing they knew of to do to temper the wind to the short lemai, to temper to their several communities, many of them doubtless expecting to be put to the sword by General Young's troopers, as the Cossacks did the Persians during the brief and sensational sojourn of that brilliant young administrator, Hun W. Morgan Chester, in Persia in 1911 December. I have no doubt that high on the list of those extending some of the warm hospitality above mentioned appeared the name of Don Jaime da Vera. It in the summer of 1904 Don Jaime had gotten out of a sick bed to attend a convention called to send delegates to the Democratic National Convention in the United States that year. 453, and also, in that same year, had run for governor of Leyte on a platform, the principal plank of which was Carthago Estelinda Carthago, being us. The American regime. De Vera was defeated that time, but ran again the next time and was elected. While the writer is not one of those who seek to show their breadth of view by gossiping with outsiders regarding what is peculiarly our own affair, still, the British viewpoint of the situation in the Visayan Islands, as conveyed by an Englishwoman whose husband was engaged in mercantile business there in 1904 May, and who therefore was certainly in a position to know the opinion of the little circle of British people at Cebu and Iloilo, may not be superfluous here. This lady, living then at Iloilo, wrote a series of letters to friends back home in England which she, afterwards published in book form. 454, in a letter dated Iloilo, January 22, 1905, page 86, she says, "The Americans give out and write in their papers that the Philippine Islands are completely pacified, and that the Filipinos love Americans and their rule. This, doubtless with good motives, is complete and utter humbug, for the country is honeycombed with insurrection and plots. The fighting has never ceased, and the natives loathe the Americans and their theories, saying so openly in their native press and showing their dislike in every possible fashion. Their one idea is to be rid of the USA, and to be free of a burden of taxation which is heavier than any the Spaniards laid on them." Also an Englishman who was in Samar in 1904 May, a Mr. Hyde, who with his brother, served with the American troops there in the bloody Coolagen Uprising, afterwards wrote a book called The Little Brown Brother, wherein he fully corroborates Samara's Dancy's appreciation of the situation during that period. In its blindness to the unanimity of Visayas discontent, as manifested in its report now under consideration, the civil government of the Philippines was not trying willfully to deceive anybody. It was deceiving itself. It was obeying the law of its life, its existence, having been originally predicated on the consent of a great free people to keep in subjection a weaker people eager to be also free, such consent having been obtained through diligent nursing of the original idea that the subject people were not in fact so eager, but were, on the contrary, in a mental attitude of tearful welcome toward the proffered protection of a strong power. In his report for 1905, 455, General William H. Carter, commanding the Department of the Philippines, which included Samar and the rest of the Visayan Islands, gives the key to the Commission's 26-day stay at his district, in the following part of said report. Within a few days after the rendition of the annual report for last year 456, a serious outbreak occurred in the Gondar Valley, Samar. This was followed by disorders in all the other large islands of the department, Negros, Panay, Cebu, and Leyte. Nowhere in the civil government reports do you find the slightest recognition that these disorders had any relation to each other, or to the fundamental problem of public order, or any political significance whatsoever, each being treated as a purely local issue. The idea that the circumstance of Samar's having been thrown into pandemonium by the successes of the enemies of the American government might have encouraged its enemies in the neighboring islands, never seeming to occur to the authors of the said reports. General Carter's report goes on to state that within 5 months after the Samar outbreak of July 1904, 700 native troops had been put in the field in that turbulent island. In December 1904, troops began to be poured to Samar, so that it was not long before the 700 native troops had become 1,700 or 1,800, and, says General Carter, in order to free them from garrison work in the towns, 16 companies of the 12th and 14th Infantry were distributed about the disaffected coasts to enable the people who so desired to come from their hiding places whither they had gone, because the American flag afforded them no protection, and undertake the rebuilding of their burnt homes. General Carter avoids touching on the civil government's, to him well-known, obsession about its popularity, a state of mind which could see no political significance in outbreaks of any kind, but he does use this very straightforward language about Samar. Whatever may have been the original cause of the outbreak, it was soon lost sight of when success had drawn a large proportion of the people away from their homes and fields. Except in the largest towns, it became simply a question of joining the Coolagans, or being harried by them. In the absence of proper protection, thousands joined in the movement. Early in 1905, Hun George Curry, of New Mexico, who was an officer of Colonel Roosevelt's regiment in Cuba, and had gone out to the Philippines with a volunteer regiment in 1899, remaining with the civil government after 1901, was made governor of Samar. Governor Curry has since been governor of the territory of New Mexico, and is now, 1912, a member of Congress from the recently admitted state of New Mexico. Governor Curry has told me since he was elected to Congress that certain all 1905 to most of 1906, aided by several thousand troops, native and regular, to take down the Samar outbreak. Yet a certificate signed March 28, 1907, by the Governor-General and his associates of the Philippine Commission states that a condition of general and complete peace had continued in the island 2 years previous to the date of the certificate. 457. We will come to this certificate in its chronological order later. How many and what sort of uprisings were blanketed in that together certificate of 1907 is material to the question whether or not the national administration has ever been or is now framed to the country about the universality of the desire of the Philippine people for independence and local self-government, and, pertinent to the insistently recurring phrase, why should we make of the Philippines an American island, whether as much as, in addition to the Samar uprising which raged all through 1905, another insurrection, occurred in which with the leading forgotten by said certificate, this transmitted must therefore attention. The provinces which were the theater of the outbreak last above, mentioned were all near Manila. They were Cavite, a province of 135,000 people almost at the gates of Manila. Batangas, a province of 257,000 inhabitants adjoining Cavite. And Laguna, a province of 150,000 people adjoining both. Some 500 brigands headed by cutthroats, claiming to be patriots were terrorizing whole districts. Or be it, from me to lend any countenance to the idea that the leaders of this movement, Sakay, Felizardo, Montalin, and the rest of their gang, were entitled to any respect, but they certainly had a hold on the whole population akin to that of Robin Hood, Little John, and Firecup, in refusing in 1907 to commit Sakay's death sentence, after he was captured, tried, and convicted. Governor General James recent details concerning the performance of Federation and his followers, even dealing to majorly extent of the trouble they gave in the Manila government. He said that, if they were convenient for patriotism, and under the titles of defenders of the country and protectors of the people proceeded to inaugurate a reign of terror, devastation, and ruin in three of the most beautiful provinces in the archipelago, or in the 50 years. It has already been made clear that, during the time of the insurrection against both the Spaniards and Americans, the insurrecto forces were maintained by voluntary contributions of the people. Major D. C. Shanks, 40th Head, regular infantry, who was governor of Cavite province in 1905, after calling attention to this fact, at 1859. When the insurrection was up, many of these leaders were named, having refused to surrender. They were even more Felizardo and Montalin. The system of voluntary contributions, carried on during the insurrecto period, was continued after establishment of civil government. Again, Governor Shanks says, with more frankness and diplomacy, considering that he was a provincial governor under the civil government. The establishment of civil government of this province was premature and ill-advised. Records show the capture or surrender, since establishment of civil government, of nearly 600 hostile firearms. One of the causes contributory to the Cavite Batangas Laguna insurrection is stated in the report of the Governor General for 1905 thus. In the autumn of 1904 it became necessary to withdraw a number of the constabulary from these provinces to assist in suppressing disorder which had broken out in the province of Samar, 460. Another of the contributory causes is thus stated. There was at the time the fall of 1904, also considerable activity among the small group of irreconcilables in Manila, who began agitating for immediate independence, doubtless because of the supposed effect it would have on the presidential election in the United States, in which the Philippines was a large topic of discussion. Evidently this was regarded as a favorable time for a demonstration by Felizardo, Montalin, De Vega, Aruga, Sakay, etc. All these men had been officers of the Filipino army during the insurrection. Consider the benevolent casualist we missed them to include these fellows, and the tremendous following they did get up, and did get up, in Cavite, the home of insurrection, and the adjacent provinces, in a certificate to a condition of general and complete peace alleged, in the certificate to have prevailed for 2 years prior to March 28, 1907, to make a long story short. On January 31, 1905, a state of insurrection was declared to exist. There were the copious public rights, suspended in Cavite and Batangas, the regular army of the United States, was ordered out, and reconcentration tactics resorted to, as provided by Section 6 of Act 781 of the Commission. This is the act already examined at length, intended to meet cases of impotency on the part of the insular government to protect life and property in any other way. However, its motive is conspicuously absent from the resolution of the Commission of January 31, 1905, formally recognizing a break in the peerless continuity of the general and complete peace. It is verily frank, the presidential election being then safely over, 461. It concludes by authorizing the Governor General to suspend the writ of habeas corpus and declare martial law, the public safety requiring it. Then follows a proclamation of the same date and tenor by the Governor General. It appears from the case cited in the footnote that in the spring of 1905, 1. Felix Barcelin filed in the proper court a petition for the writ of habeas corpus, alleging that he was one of the reconcentrados, corralled and detained and restrained of his liberty at the town of Batangas, in the province of Batangas, by one of Colonel Baker's constabulary minions down there. The writ was denied by the lower court. In one part of the opinion of the Supreme Court in the case it is stated, p. 116, that the petitioner has been detained for a long time not for the commission of any crime and by due process of law, but apparently for the purpose of protecting him. The opinion of the court, delivered by M.R. Justice Johnson, very properly held that the detention was lawful under the war power, basing its decision on the authority conferred on the Governor-General of the Philippines by the Act of Congress of July 1, 1902, Section 5 of which expressly authorizes the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus when in cases of rebellion, insurrection, or invasion of public safety may require it. Along legal battle response, the court holding that the executive department of the government is the one in which is vested the exclusive right to say when a state of rebellion, insurrection, or invasion exists, and that when it so formally declares that settles the fact that it does exist. At page 98 of the following comment, cited 462, the court held, as to the above-mentioned resolution of the Philippine Commission and the above-mentioned executive order, declaring a state of insurrection and free by the the conclusion set forth in the said resolution and the said executive order, as to the fact that there existed in the provinces of free by the town was open insurrection against the constituted authorities, was a conclusion entirely within the discretion of the legislative and executive branches of the government, after an investigation of the facts. Yet 2 years later the same constituted authorities certified to the President of the United States, in effect, as we shall see, that no open insurrection against the constituted authorities had occurred during the preceding 2 years. They do not in their certificate ignore Tibay and Batangas. They mention them by name, with a lot of whereases, explaining that after all they really believe that the majority of the people in the provinces aforesaid were not in sympathy with the uprising. However, after they get through with their whereases, they praise the music squarely and certify to the condition of general and of the nigger in the wood Palmornon. Governor Wright was not a party to the certificate of 1907. He left the islands on November 4, 1905. A speech made by him prior to his departure, as published in a Manila paper, indicates an expectation to return. He never did. In 1906 he was demoted to be ambassador to Japan, a place of far less dignity and far less salary, which he resigned after a year or so. Vice Governor Wright acted as Governor General until April 2, 1906, on which date he was formally inaugurated as Governor General. Just why Governor Wright did not go back to the Philippines as governor after his visit to the United States in 1905 June, thus not appear. It would seem almost certain that the Secretary of War, Taft wanted President Roosevelt to tell him that he would have gone. M.R. Taft never did frankly tell the Filipinos until 1907 that they might just as well shut up talking about any independence that anybody living might hope to see. Governor Wright began to talk that way soon after M.R. Taft left the islands, possibly Governor Wright, undeceived them too soon, and thereby made the Philippines more of a troublesome issue in the presidential campaign of 1904. President Roosevelt recognized the sterling worth of a man by inviting him to succeed M.R. Taft as Secretary of War in 1908. The President, Taft did not invite him to continue in that capacity after March 4, 1909. The author covered that when the incoming President Taft letter gave the outgoing President Roosevelt's last Secretary of War, Governor Wright, was unpaid addressing the conclusion of being able to again myself. Your services later in some other capacity, was Fred Barton, the outgoing official quietly remarked. Well, that is a little more roundabout than the one Jimmy Garfield poured in but it's a dismissal just the same. I have always thought that the reason Governor Wright did not go back to the Philippines as governor after 1905 was that he did not continue to jolly the Filipinos and abstain from ruthlessly crushing their hopes of seeing independence during their lifetime, as M.R. Taft did continuously during his stay out there. The inevitable tendency of the right-frank talk was from the beginning to discredit the task, even the invasive nothings, although it was followed, as we have seen, by catastrophic serious disturbance of Republican and somebody as we close. Chapter XX. Governor IDE, 1906. The tariff is a local issue. General W. S. Hancock. After Governor Wright left the islands finally on November 4, 1905, Vice Governor Henry C. I. General until April 2, 1906, remained the senior inaugurated as such, to reside and living, islands finally in September thereafter. All through 1905, Governor Curry, as Governor of Samoa, which is the third largest island of the archipelago, represented the Pelagian uprising there, aided, as had been stated in the previous chapter, by the military, states, and constabulary, and also by the regular army. But at the end of 1905 the situation was not yet well in hand. Since his election to Congress in 1912, Governor Curry has told me that in 1905 many thousands of people of Samoa participated actively as part of the enemy's force in the field during the period. By the spring of 1906 Governor Curry was getting a grip on the situation, and in the latter part of March of that year, some of the main outlaw chiefs agreed to surrender to him. The report of Colonel Wallace C. Taylor, commanding the constabulary of the 3rd District, which included Samoa State's 464, after several weeks of negotiating, during which time the town of Pulahanes was visited by Governor Curry, and the Pulahan officers visited the settlement, at led to a settlement in south-central Samoa. An understanding was arrived at by which the Pulahanes were to surrender, March 24, 1906. Instead of surrendering as agreed, the Pulahanes, commanded by Nazario Aguilar, made a treacherous attack on the constabulary garrison. On the day and hour appointed for the surrender, the constabulary numbered some 50 men, the Pelagians about 130. After the Pelagians opened fire, they made a rush on the constabulary and a hand-to-hand fight ensued. Colonel Taylor's report continues. After the first rush the fighting continued fiercely, and when the last of the Pulahanes disappeared there remained but 7 enlisted men of the constabulary able to fight. 7 more were lying about more or less seriously wounded and 22 were dead. Captain Jones received a bad spear thrust in the chest early in the fight, but fought on regardless. Lieutenant Bowers received a gunshot wound through the left arm, which, however, did not put him out of the fight. 35 dead Pulahanes were found on the field and 8 more have since been found some distance off. The number of wounded who escaped cannot be determined. The unarmed Americans present with Governor Curry escaped to the river and afterwards rejoined Captain Jones who armed them. The explanation of this treachery, as given by Governor Curry, is curious and interesting. The outlaws had intended in good faith to surrender as a result of his negotiation with them, but at the last moment there arrived to witness the surrender certain native officials, and other natives bitterly hated by the Pelagians and wholly mistrusted by them. Their arrival caused the outlaws to suspect treachery themselves, and that was the cause of their change of plans. It was not until the end of the year 1906 that the various energetic campaigns, which followed the Mactain incident, finally began to work more or less complete restoration of public order by gradual elimination of the enemy through killings, captures, and surrenders. An idea of the seriousness and magnitude of these operations may be gathered without going into the details from the annual report for 1906 of General Henry T. Allen commanding the Philippines Constabulary. This report, dated August 31, 1906, 465, states: at present 17 companies of scouts and 4 companies of American troops under Colonel Smith, 8th U.S. Infantry, are operating against the Pulahanes, but with success that will be largely dependent upon time and attrition. General Alan Ans, the entire 21st Regiment of Infantry is also in Samar. These facts are here given because they relate to the period covered by the certificate of the Philippine Commission of March 28, 1907, heretofore alluded to, and which will be more fully dealt with hereinafter, which stated that a condition of general and complete peace had prevailed throughout the archipelago for 2 years prior to March 28, 1907. Without a brief exposition of all these matters, it would be impossible to enable the reader to feel the pulse of the Filipino people as it stood at the time of the election of their assembly in 1907, the fact of our having been unable to discontinue Filipino killing altogether for any considerable period from 1899 to the end of 1906 is too obviously relevant to the state of the public mind in 1907 to need elaboration. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1906-466 deals at some length of disturbances which occurred in the island of Leyte, area 3,000 square miles, population nearly 400,000, beginning in the middle of June. It describes among other things a visit of Governor General I. to Tacloban, the capital of Leyte, made in consequence of said disturbances, and conferences held by and there with Major General Wood, commanding all the United States forces in the Philippines, Brigadier General Lee, commanding the Department of the Business, which included Leyte headquarters, Iloilo, Colonel Borden, commanding the United States forces in the island of Leyte, Colonel Taylor, the chief of the constabulary of the district, etc. Certainly from this formidable gathering of notables, it is clear that there was about to take place in Leyte what our friends of the Lens Club in New York would call an all-star performance. Leyte was 400 to 500 miles from Manila. It placed the disturbance at the highest military and civil representatives of the American government in the archipelago deemed it necessary to meet in the island which was the scene of the trouble with a view of handling it. It and the report of the Philippine Commission for 1906 one finds the usual rotund rhetoric, treating the disturbances as of no political significance, which was only another way of claiming that they were not serious. It is difficult to handle this aspect of the matter without imputing to the civil authorities intent to deceive, that to make such an imputation underneath would be to miss the whole significance of the matter, as has already been made clear when Judge Taft, Judge Olive, and their colleagues of the Philippine Commission had left Washington for Manila in 1900. McKinley had assured them he had no doubt that the better element of the Philippine people, once they understood us, would welcome our rule. As soon as they set foot in the Philippine Islands, they had at once begun to act upon the theory that there was no real fundamental opposition to us on the part of the people of the Philippines, and had continued obstinately to act upon that theory ever since. Certainly the attitude of the civil government toward the disturbances in even 1906 is not surprising. When the mind adverts for a moment to the panorama of the 5 more or less sanguinary years already fully described even before, and then takes the following bird's-eye glance at the official reports for those years. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1900, page 17, had said, a great majority of the people long for peace and are entirely willing to accept the establishment of a government under the supremacy of the United States. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1901, page 7, had said, the collapse of the insurrection came in May. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1902, page 3, had said, the insurrection as an organized attempt to subvert the authority of the United States in the island is entirely unknown. Referring back onto the full system of Philippine Commission, as enjoying civil government, is the enjoyment as described as enjoyment, continued, profound, and sincere. It would have been another story, but the net attitude of the civil government toward the general public of our politics, relative to the public order, reminds one of the chief and temperamental remarks of the Lord. Friends, he seems to be enjoying poor health. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1903, page 25, says, the conditions which restrict the tranquility of the islands have greatly improved during the last year. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1904, page 1, says, the great mass of the people, however, were domestic and peaceable. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1905, part 1, page 59, says, on the whole life and property have been as safe as in other civilized countries. The report of the Philippine Commission for 1906, page 40, says, viewing the entire situation, the islands are in a peaceable and orderly condition without various disorders which filled some 10 pages of the report. The inflexible attitude of the Commission from the beginning of treating each successive disturbance of public order as a purely local issue after General Hancock's method with the tariff is thus sufficiently apparent. They always refuse to see any successive outbreaks in various parts of the islands, any evidence of general and unanimous lack of appreciation for a benign alien civil government, therefore was of course clearly foregone. Conclusion. In 1906, that Governor Hyde, who had been in the islands all these years, was going to be wholly unable to see anything in the disturbances in lead in the least tending to show that American rule was unpopular, and yet it was a matter of common knowledge all over the Visayas Islands that the government elected by the people was one of the most obnoxious anti-Americans in the archipelago. Both the army and constabulary were ordered out in late, and a good deal of fighting occurred before order was restored. The report of General Allen, commanding the constabulary section 467, shows one engagement with the outlaws in Lake participated in by the constabulary and the 21st Regular Infantry, in which the enemy numbered 450 and left 49 dead upon the field. All this period is covered by the Certificate of General and Complete Peace of 1907, in the fall of the and those of the membership of that body not in favor of Philippine independence were almost as few as the Socialist Party and the American House of Representatives, which, I believe, consists of Representative Berger. True, the outbreak, it forgets and forgives it, so do speak, as we shall see. Governor Wright left the islands finally on September 20, 1906, having resigned. Why he should have resigned, it is difficult to say. Take it all in all, he was appointed Governor General, and had been there 6 years. His going out of office to make way for still another Governor General was wholly uncalled for. So far as the writer is informed, he was, when he left, still blessed with good health. He had filled a very considerable place in the history of his country. Most creditably, he had drawn up a fine code of laws for the islands known as the Ide Code. He had made a great minister of finance, successfully performing the perilous task of transferring the currency of the country from a silver basis to a gold basis, and in so doing it,
see you next time.